Hey guys, Timothy here. So the Battle for Zendikar set has been completely spoiled. I've been looking over the spoilers for quite a bit. I'm very excited for it. I know a lot of people are disappointed because the set's not very good for limited, or I'm sorry, not good for standard, modern. It seems like it's definitely going to warp standard, but nobody seems to know exactly what they're leaning towards, and a lot of people have been disappointed with the power level. I, however, am looking at limited because I play mostly only draft and sealed. So I'm going to go through the cards a little bit at a time. Right now I'm just going to do the white cards, which I'm pretty excited about the white cards. I think white is going to be one of the best colors. I am going to note ahead of time, like I said, this is meant for limited only, so there are cards that I'm going to value highly in limited, which you may not like in standard, but keep that in mind that I'm only looking at draft and sealed, and primarily draft, because I don't actually play a lot of sealed outside of tournaments and pre-releases. But let's go ahead and jump into it. We're going to start with the commons. We're going to work our way over. Our first one here is Tandem Tactics. These are in no particular... Actually, I think they're backwards. Alphabetical. And I should note, all of the images are from mythicspoiler.com. So just giving credit where credit is due. But look at Tandem Tactics. We've got a 2-mana instant, give up to 2 target creatures, +1/+2 for the turn, and you gain 2 life. The incidental life gain is not irrelevant here. There are some cards that we'll see that care about you gaining life, mostly in white and black. So the extra 2 life is pretty decent. I think the +1/+2 is also a lot better than it sounds. +1/+1 and +1/+2 are different enough that this card seems good to me. A lot of times you'll be using this against aggressive red decks, which I don't think there are going to be too many all-out aggressive decks in this format, but a lot of decks will look to trade up with combat tricks, and Tandem Tactics is kind of a response to that, gaining you life that you may have lost in a slower start, plus allowing your creatures to survive combat. And the up to 2 is good as well, since you can technically use it on 1 target if you need to. And if in an absolute pinch you have no creatures and you just need to gain 2 life, you can use this as 2 mana gain 2, which is terrible, but it is an option. Moving on, we have Sheer Drop. We have a 3 mana sorcery, destroy target tapped creature. Now, if we were to just ignore the Awaken text, and that's all we had, this card would already be pretty decent. At sorcery speed, sure, it's not as good, but 3 mana to kill a creature is already playable, especially at common. Now, Awaken cards, the way I evaluate them is the card has to be good without Awaken in order for me to really like it. Some cards are really good with Awaken, but the Awaken costs are all pretty high. And if the card is terrible without making the extra creature, I don't think I really want it. Here, the Awaken cost is just extra. If you happen to have 6 mana, then you get to add a 3/3 to the board, destroy your opponent's creature, and add a 3/3 to your board is pretty good. I would definitely spend 6 mana on that, but I don't think I would just hold this card up until I have 6 mana if I needed it to get rid of a problematic blocker or a creature that's beating me down. So this card is very versatile. I think it's going to be a very high pick, and if you're in white, I think you need to pick it high because I doubt these cards are wheeling around. I would take Sheer Drop as a sign that white is open in draft as well. If you see it maybe 3rd, 4th pick, take it and look to play white. Very similarly, we have Gideon's Reproach, which is 2 mana instant, dealing 4 damage to a target attacking or blocking creature. Now I have Sandblast here because the card is very similar. For 1 less mana, you do 1 less damage, but they will deal with pretty much the same creatures, save for a few situations where that 1 extra damage matters. Sandblast was a very good common in white for Fate Reforged, dealt with nearly every creature you needed to, and the versatility of being able to use it on your turn or your opponent's turn, forcing some sort of block and clearing it off, or blocking your opponent's creature and clearing it off, makes Gideon's Reproach look very appealing to me. Now, it is worth noting that Gideon's in battle for Zendikar, there are going to be a lot of really huge creatures that might hit the board, and Gideon's Reproach will not deal with them as well. There are a lot of X7s, X8s, and so on and so forth. But for the early game and at least the middle of the game, Gideon's Reproach is going to be very good. Also, you can combine it with some blockers to 2-for-1 yourself if it means clearing off your opponent's big 8/8 or something like that. I think Gideon's Reproach, same thing as Sheer Drop, should be noted as white being open if they're coming fairly late in the pack, and I think the card is going to be very good. Following that up, we get Felidar Cub, a 2-mana 2/2, already passed the bear test, so on curve it would be playable even if it didn't have an ability, and you have the option to sack it and destroy an enchantment. There aren't a huge number of enchantments that you really need to worry about. There are some that having this ability is very useful. We've seen this card a lot. These are 2 other iterations that we've seen recently in Modern Masters and Return to Ravnica, and both of those, if they had a target, they had very good targets. For instance, Kami of Ancient Law can take out Narcolepsy or Arrest. Felidar Cub similarly can take out any problem enchantments, which we will see one in the uncommon slot here. But like I said, there aren't too many enchantments you're absolutely worried about, unlike Fate Reforged. So you may not ever really need to use. Oh, sorry guys. You may not ever really need to use this ability, but even so, you get a 2/2 for 2, and that is just fine by itself. So Felidar Cub, not a sign white's open, but a very playable white card. Here we get Smite the Monstrous again. With some new art, an instant destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. I believe this was last printed in Khans of Tarkir, where it was very good. Khans of Tarkir had some very big creatures that you definitely wanted to smite. There are some situations where you're getting beat down by a 3x or a 2 something and you can't smite it off, and it's frustrating, but most of the time smite is very good. And for 4 mana, you get to deal with a lot of your opponent's bombs in this format. 6/6s, 6/7s, huge things that you definitely want smite for. I think smite is going to be better in this format than it was in previous formats, and I don't necessarily think you need to pick it up super high, but it is very much worth having. I would be very happy to have instant speed removal for my opponent's huge bombs. Now we get Stonehaven Medic. I'm not super excited about this card. It's a 2-mana 1/3, which is a decent blocker against a lot of 2/2s. For 1 white mana and tap, you gain a life. Now this is very similar to Soulmender. It is... I don't even want to say it's better than Soulmender. Soulmender was a bad card, and the only reason to play Soulmender was alongside Ajani's Pridemate, and even then the Soulmender itself was not a good card, but a good enabler. I think Stonehaven Medic is going to be very similar. Unless I'm absolutely hurting for a 2-drop, I don't think I would play this card. There are some life gain synergies where this becomes pretty good, but the card itself is not amazing. It's the synergies that work with other cards that are good. So don't take this guy early unless you either A, need to fill the 2-drop slot, or B, you have cards it works with. Don't get tricked by the I'm just going to start gaining life on 1 turn, especially when you have to dump a mana into it every turn. The card is not going to be that great, even though it is playable. I won't dismiss it as unplayable, whereas I thought Soulmender was unplayable. Yeah, do not go all in on Stonehaven Medic. Just my opinion. Some people are a lot heavier on these life gain cards and the attrition matches. It will be good in a board stall, but other than that, I don't see it being that amazing. Following up, we get a 2/2 Flyin for 3. Not much to say here. This card is just fine. It's not amazing. It's not bad. It is filler. I would cut it if my 3-drop looked too high or if I wanted to be more aggressive. But Flyin, 2 damage in the air starting on turn 4, can peck away at your opponent's life total. It does get blanked by a lot of the other flyers in this format, which is kind of sad. But if you need to fill the curve or if you need to get another attacker in there, go right on ahead with this. Onto Great Horn is a 4 mana. When when you trigger landfall, it gets +2/+2 for the turn, and it also has first strike. So under ideal circumstances, this can attack as a 4/5 first striker, which is going to take down almost everything that gets in its path starting on turn 5 and ahead. Again, you do have to be triggering landfall for this to be great. So this card wavers between decent to fantastic, the difference being whether or not you can put a land on the battlefield. The fact that there are ways to instant speed lands onto the battlefield make this a lot more appealing to me. The card is just fine by itself, and if I had an empty spot in the 4-drop slot, I would not mind playing this as is, but with instant speed land tricks, this becomes even more aggressive, and I think first strike is what pushes it over the top for me. I would look to pick this kind of not super high, but I would not mind having at least one in any of my white decks. Kindy Patrol is a 3-mana 2/3 with Rally. Rally is a new keyword that triggers when either it or another ally enters the battlefield. In this case, the trigger gives all of your creatures Vigilance. It is worth noting Rally gives all of your creatures Vigilance, not just your allies. It only triggers on allies entering, but all of your creatures get the benefit. So giving your entire team Vigilance on turn 3 with an already playable 3-drop creature means that your turn 1 and 2, if you dropped a creature down, they're able to attack and make your opponent's turn kind of a little awkward, since they can't just attack back. It lets you kind of get ahead in a race or force blocks. So I think this card is good. If you're a dedicated ally deck, which is absolutely going to be a thing, then I think this card gets even better, but I would play this even in a non-dedicated ally deck. The stats are decent, not amazing, but they're fine for a 3-drop, and the ability is just upside. Next we get Lithomancer's Focus. Very similar to Enshrouded Mist, but not quite the same. It's a 1-mana instant. It gives +2/+2 and prevents all damage to a creature of your choice. It prevents damage by colorless sources only. There are a lot of colorless sources in this format that deal damage, including creatures and non-creature spells, but the fact that there are also a lot of colored spells that deal damage makes Lithomancer's Focus a little less appealing to me than Enshrouded Mist. They're not strictly the same either. Enshrouded Mist did have the clause that renowned creatures untapped, which I didn't see come up too often, but was relevant. I think Enshrouded Mist is going to be better in Origins than Lithomancer's Focus will be in Battle for Zendikar, but I also want to take note of just how powerful a 1-mana trick like this can be, either to force into damage, to just win a combat if you need to. Sometimes you can just use this as a mini giant growth for +2/+2, and that'll be enough even without preventing the damage. So I think Lithomancer's Focus is fine as a 1-of in any white deck, and if your opponent is just all in on colorless creatures, it becomes that much better. So the upside is definitely there already, and it has the potential to be a huge blowout if it needs to be, or if it can be. And we get Inspired Charge. This is another reprint that we've seen. It was in M15 last, I believe. It is double white as well, so the restrictions are a little high, and it's a very generic effect, giving your entire team of creatures +2/+1 for the turn. It is instant though, and we've seen this kind of effect in a lot of the most recent sets with some sort of upside. Kithian's Tactics could give Vigilance, Russia Battle gave your warriors lifelink, but the idea is the same. The upside here, which I think makes it a lot better than these other cards, is that it is instant speed. It can be used on your opponent's turn defensively if you need to, can really warp a combat in your favor, and a lot of times cards like this can straight up win you the game. You do have to go kind of wide to make it amazing, and I think the card is playable, but it's very medium. I would not look to pick it up super high unless I was very, very token based or had a lot of creatures that worked around it, or if I had a lot of flyers. But the card is worth noting, and if your opponent's attacking you with a bunch of guys and they have 4 mana up, you do need to be aware that Inspired Charge is a relevant card in this format. Probably the most unexciting card we get from this set, another 1/1 flyer. This time it's not a bird. Avon Skirmisher was a bad card that people loved for some reason. It was a warrior, and warriors were relevant in its format, but Kite Sail Scout's not even an ally. It has no relevant typing. 1/1 flyers are not good. If you have some sort of game plan with them, go ahead, but usually I think these cards are unplayable. 1 damage per turn starting on turn 2 is just not worth the slot if you have a better card to replace it. Even a 2/2 for 2 I would definitely play over this. Even if I don't have a 1-drop, I don't know what the format's going to be like yet, but usually you can get away with not having 1-drop creatures in your deck as long as your turn 2 is good. My opinion, pass on Kite Sail Scout. If you really want it, wait for it to come back to you in the pack, because most likely it will. A lot of times, I imagine this will be last pickable. Core Castigator. Now, this is a 2-mana 3/1, which is almost always good and limited. That might, if it didn't have text, that might seem a little bad because 3/1s get blocked very easily in this format by Eldrazi Scions, which are 1/1s that come tacked onto a slew of different creatures. But we have text here that says this creature can't be blocked by Eldrazi Scions. So sometimes your opponent will drop one of their Eldrazi's and they will make a Scion on top. If they want to block your guy, they're going to have to throw an actual creature in front of it instead of just chumping and trading with their extra 1/1. And the 3/1s always have the upside that if your opponent isn't playing things or they have a very slow game, you can start getting in damage very early. Worth noting also, this is an ally, so it does trigger Rally. Fortified Rampart, 2-mana defender, 0/6, probably the biggest bomb in the entire set, and I say that sarcastically. The comparison here is to Guardians of Meltease, which we just saw in Origins again, a 0/6 defender, same stats, same non-usability for 1 more mana, so that already makes the Fortified Ramparts look okay, but it is worth noting Guardians of Meltease was actually a pretty decent sideboard card in Origins, not only because the creatures were much smaller in the set and often couldn't get through it, but also because there were artifact synergies, whereas Fortified Rampart is actually just going to get eaten by some of the bigger things in the late game and has almost no synergy that I can think of in this set. If you needed to fill the 2-drop or if your opponent had really early big plays, I would not mind having Fortified Rampart, but I think as of right now I'm leaning towards leaving it in the sideboard. The art also just kind of makes me sad. Moving on, Ghostly Sentinel. Probably the weirdest art in the set in my opinion, but 5 mana you get a 3/3 Flyin Vigilance. 5 mana for 3/3 flyer is pretty standard, and that is already playable by itself. Vigilance I don't know is worth paying this much for, but since it's already playable without Vigilance, it just makes it better that it has Vigilance. One thing to note about Limited is to not underestimate the power of a late game flyer. This is a late game flyer, and it will start beating you down if you do not respect the damage that it can do. It is not a bomb by any means, and again, it's a very mediocre card, but it can definitely get the damage in there while also doing a good job of blocking the little guys on the ground. So I would not mind playing this, I just don't think it's super exciting. Angelic Gift, we get an aura here. Enchant creature, when it enters the battlefield, when Angelic Gift enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and the enchanted creature has Flyin. Now the relevant part here is draw a card. If that text wasn't here, I don't know that I'd play this too often. The problem with auras that most people are aware of is if the creature that has the aura on it dies, your opponent gets 2 cards out of you instead of 1, but the fact that this card replaces itself gets around that and justifies playing it. Also, we've seen from a lot of enchantments in the most recent sets that just tacking Flyin onto a guy is super strong in certain situations, especially when your creatures are 8/8s. 2 examples come to mind that I didn't put here. Consecrated by Blood in Origins gave +2/+2 in Flyin. This doesn't give a boost, but it does come down earlier, which means that you can start beating down early in the game on a little guy, or in the late game or a board stall, you can put it on a bigger guy and start getting in for massive damage. Do I think the card is busted? No, by no means, but I would definitely love to have a copy in any sort of aggressive white deck. Cliffside Lookout. Here's a card that I'm a little at contention with. We get a 1 mana 1/1, and for 5 mana, you pump your team with +1/+1. Now, I've seen people immediately look at Sunblade Elf and say that Sunblade Elf was good, so Cliffside Lookout's going to be good. I don't think that comparison really works. The reason being, Sunblade Elf was in a format where green-white, the colors that benefit Sunblade Elf, green-white was a convoke deck strategy and had Raise the Alarms plus Triplicate Spirits as already good cards that went really, really wide and gave this creature a lot of reach. The +1/+1 on Sunblade Elf often accounted for 3, 4, 5 extra damage anytime you triggered it. Not to mention the extra calls where the planes sometime made this a 2/2 on turn 2 was very good. Cliffside Lookout has the benefit of being an ally, and sure, there are a couple token generators in this, but I don't think it's nearly as good in Battle for Zendikar as Sunblade Elf is going to be with cards like Triplicate Spirits in its own format. I'm not going to completely write off the card. Again, 1-drops might be relevant, and I just don't know it yet. And this is not a completely negligible effect in the right kind of deck, but I don't think it's amazing. I think it's a very, very late pick, and I think it's filler at best. Maybe I'll be proved wrong about that, and I'm sure I'll die to this effect at some point, but my opinion is it is not as good as anybody might think it is. So we get our standard Griffin. I don't know what it is, but R&D at Wizards must have a rule about Griffins where they have to be 2 X's with some random ability for 4 mana. I don't know. That's always how Griffins always seem to end up. This card is just fine. Again, incidental life gain has some relevant uses in this format, so the +2 life is not amazing, but it can do some wonderful things. And the 2/3 flyer for 4, while not hugely above curve, is just fine at 4 mana that you can start attacking for 2 or block your opponent's flyers. If I'm playing white, I would be happy with this card just fine. We get to our first uncommon here, Unified Front. I have no idea what's going on in this picture, but also our first Converge card. Converge is a little tricky, so we see put a 1/1 white core ally, again, ally, creature token onto the battlefield for each color of mana spent to cast it. So the more colors of mana you can spend, the better this card gets. Converge is a little tricky because it has a minimum where the card becomes good, and it has a maximum. Even if you're playing a 5-color deck, you can't actually spend 5 mana on this card, so the most you can get out of this card is 4 tokens, which is good. 4 mana for 4 tokens is absolutely playable. That means you have to spend 4 different colors to do it, but allies will, I think, benefit you to play as many colors as possible, and if you can do that reliably and trigger your rally cards 4 times, seems very good. Especially considering there's an ally that gives everything +2/+2. I think this card is going to be fine. Now, sorry for the background noises. The problem is this card is almost completely unplayable if you are 1 or 2 colors. I think it's fine at 2 colors, but 4 mana for 2 1/1s at sorcery speed doesn't seem great. What I really want is to reliably be able to get 3 tokens out of this, and if I get 4, that's just the extra there. If I can get 4, the card is absolutely amazing. If I can get 3, it's good, and if I get 2 or less, I'm not excited about playing it. Stasis Snare. Now this is a good card, and this is the enchantment I was talking about for Felidar Cub. We get a double white card, so the mana considerations are there, and we get a flash enchantment that basically is Banisher Priest without the body. When it enters the battlefield, you exile a creature as long as you control Stasis Snare. Now, flash is a huge, huge upside here. It didn't have flash and you can only play it on your turn at sorcery speed. It would also still just be almost first pickable over a lot of other cards. Flash makes it absolutely first pickable over a lot of cards, as it's instant speed removal for any creature it can target. I don't think I really need to say much else about that. The only thing that really gets around it is hexproof creatures. Or if your opponent's going very wide, the 1-for-1 removal may not be as great. But this card does exactly what you want removal to do. And if you can do double white, then you absolutely want Stasis Snare. Now here's a card I'm a little iffy on. First off, the art on this is amazing. I have no idea what's going on, but it looks great. 2 mana, whenever a creature you control attacks this turn, whenever any creature attacks this turn, it gains lifelink until the end of the turn. Now here's a card that I kind of think the opposite of what I usually do on these Awaken cards. A lot of times the text has to be good without Awaken for me to like it, and if the card needs Awaken to be good, then I don't like it. This one, however, I don't really like the text by itself. However, if I cast the Awaken, 5 mana for a 4/4 is already playable. That would be fine as a vanilla creature. But 5 mana as a 4/4 plus, given everything else you control or anything that can attack that turn lifelink, seems pretty good to me. I don't think I really want this effect just for the lifelink if I'm not using the Awaken on it. Unless you're trying to really push ahead of your opponent, or if you're racing to 40 life for some specific card, then I don't really think wasting 1 card just for life gain is worth it. You could potentially gain a huge amount of life off this, and there are things that are relevant with life, as I've said before. But I think the sweet spot here is really using the Awaken and getting the lifelink as an added bonus instead of using the lifelink with Awaken as an added bonus. I also put Two-Headed Giant here as something of note. I do play Two-Headed Giant a lot at pre-releases, and cards like this tend to be very good. When you cast this on your turn, it'll benefit both you and your partner. So if you're both attacking with a bunch of creatures, you can gain lots and lots of life. And life gain in Two-Headed Giant is a lot better than life gain is in 1v1. Serene Steward, one of our cards that cares about gaining life. First off, 2/2 for 2, passes the bear test, also an ally, so good in those decks. Whenever you gain life, you can pay white. If you do, put a 1/1 counter on target creature. So you can move that counter anywhere, not just on her. Some cards, very few cards in this set care about 1/1 counters, but the effect is not negligible. I also put Stonehaven Medic here because these cards go hand in hand very well. It's 2 mana, gain a life, put a counter on a creature, which can add up very good. I don't think you want to spend all that mana in the early game to do this sort of combo, and I don't know that even this possibility justifies playing Stonehaven Medic over a better card, but the possibility is there, and it is worth noting. I think this ability is strong if you have a lot of incidental life gain, but I don't think it's something you want to force life gain cards for, because the card is just playable without the ability. So again, it is an ally, it'll benefit that way, and you do have the possibility to combo off with some other creatures. And here's a card I'm pretty excited about. Royal's Retribution is a 5 mana instant, dealing 5 damage divided as you choose between any number of attackers or blockers. Very good. One of the problems we saw with Magic Origins is it was very hard to clear off multiple creatures at the same time outside of some of the rares and board wipes. This card does exactly what you want it to. In the very worst case scenario, you can cast it as a 5 mana spell to just deal 5 damage to an attacker, and then you're sandblasting that creature. Very similar to the Gideons, whatever the card we talked about earlier. I've already forgotten the name, but sandblast basically. Now, that's worst case scenario. In best case scenario, you can pick off 2, maybe 3 creatures, or in some situations you can finish creatures off that are attacking, or you can warp combat so that a lot of your creatures die, or your opponent's creatures die. I think this card is very good. I think it's a very high pick, and again, if you see it in the pack, white is probably open. Combat tricks like these are going to be pretty good. Core Entangler is a card I'm very excited about. Now, if we ignore the rally text, or if we ignore the rally trigger and we just look at the ability, this is the same exact thing as Heavy Infantry from Magic Origins. Heavy Infantry was a very unexciting card, a very late pick. It was playable, but only if you didn't have better 5-drops to take its spot, or only if you really had to force in damage. Core Entanglers is the same card, but basically every time you play an ally, you get to repeat the effect, which is very good. Now, Entanglers is even better than that because a lot of the times the allies you're playing are going to give the Entanglers some additional ability, whether it's lifelink, first strike, vigilance, etc. So tapping down your opponent's creature, getting some sort of buff, and being able to swing in there repeatedly makes core Entanglers very, very good, and really just puts heavy infantry to shame. Core BladeWhirl, following up with another core, another uncommon, and another ally. We get, again, a bear, so white has a lot of the good 2-drops, and we get a rally card whenever the BladeWhirl or another ally enters the battlefield. All of your creatures, not just the allies, but all of your creatures gain first strike. Now, that is a very powerful ability. One of the best ways to win a game of Magic if you're playing a heavy creature deck is to give your guys first strike and jam in. It makes your opponent's blocks miserable. They either have to just take a bunch of damage, trade extra creatures they're not willing to, or just chump so you don't get in damage. It is worth noting there are very few ways to instant speed your allies into play. And this is worth noting in Standard as well, which I don't talk about a lot. I'm thinking Rally the Ancestors, but giving first strike to all of your creatures at instant speed is insane and very, very good way to almost just win the game. But even here, playing this on turn 2 and following up with a flurry of allies just makes this card bonkers. I think this is a very high pick, and even without the allies, again, it's just fine as a 2/2 for 2. So we get Encircle and Fissure, a card that I think I'm probably valuing a lot higher than most people. Let's read it. Prevent all combat damage that would be dealt by creatures target opponent controls. And then we get to tack on Awaken 2 if we cast it for 5 instead. Now, I'm fine with this card with just the extra text. So Awaken is just gravy for me here. It's extra gas, and I'm fine being able to have the option to pay 2 extra and make a 2/2. Now, I normally don't like fogs. What makes me like a fog is when it's a one-sided fog, and this is absolutely one-sided. The direct comparison I have here is Winds of Kalsthizma, which was a normal fog but had the option to be a one-sided fog under conditional if you had a power 4 or greater creature. Encircle and Fissure doesn't have that little clause there, so it's automatically target your opponent, their creatures deal no damage. This is the type of ability that can win you the game on its own if you play it at the right time. You can play it very early and warp the field to your advantage by picking off a lot of your opponent's attackers, or in this case, their blockers. But this is the type of card that I tend to hold on until a very late part of the game and just always make sure I have the mana available to play it. Because there usually comes a time where your opponent's just going to alpha strike to try to get a win in, and if you have Encircle and Fissure, you not only get to prevent all of their damage, but you get to pick off some of their creatures. Encircle and Fissure seems even more exciting to me because you have this Awaken option. If you have the extra 2 mana when you cast it, you get to add a 2/2 to the board, and that seems pretty good to me. Also, that 2/2 can block and potentially pick off another creature, while also preventing damage that will be dealt to it. I think this is going to be a high pick for me, a very, very high pick for me. But I expect to see people pass this sort of ability. I've seen a lot of people shrug off cards like Winds of Kalsthizma and other conditional fogs, but fogs can be used to your advantage very highly, and they are not to be underestimated. The same with Inspired Charge. If you are planning on attacking your opponent out, and they have a card in hand and 3 white mana, you need to be wary that Encircle and Fissure is in this format. Alright, and we get an uncommon 2/1 for 1. Now, 2/1s for 1 are usually just fine. If you get them on turn 1, they're amazing, and if you get them late in the game, they're kind of miserable, especially if you're top decking and looking for an answer. But the fact that this is an ally makes this pretty fantastic. Because even if you draw it in the late game and its body's not going to be relevant, it can trigger Rally and give all of your other guys a boost while adding to the board in a not insignificant way. So I think Expedition Envoy is fine. I wouldn't look to pick this card up and then grab allies. I would look to have allies and then see if I get this card. That's just my opinion about 2/1s. I think people overvalue them, but I think they're just fine. And we get Angel of Renewal. So 6 mana for a 4/4 flyer. When it enters the battlefield, you gain a life for each creature you control. It is also an ally as well. So clearly R&D decided to just tack on ally to a bunch of random creatures, but that makes the format better, right? Now 6 mana is pretty high. I would definitely still play this card even if I had nothing else going for it. It's going to always gain you at least 1 life, probably more than that. And if you have cards that care about this sort of life gain, again, it just gets better. If you have cards that care about this being an ally, it gets better. But if nothing else goes for you, you're getting 4 power and 4 toughness and a flyer for 6 mana, and you're going to gain at least 1 life of it. It's fine as a 1-of. If I have another 6-drop, I probably play that 6-drop before this, depending on what it is. But this card is playable, if not pretty strong. I might be undervaluing it, but I don't think it's amazing. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about this one. Here we come to the first of a cycle of cards, Retreat to Emeria, 4 mana enchantment. When you play, landfall trigger, either you put a 1/1 ally creature token onto the battlefield, a core ally, or your creatures get +1/+1. Now, I'm a little skeptical as to whether or not I really want to play this and take turn 4 off, but if I can reliably trigger landfall after that, the card is pretty good. Getting a 1/1 every time you play a land is fine. And if you need to, you can give your guys an Anthem for the turn and just swing in for extra damage. I think the more relevant ability is putting the ally token onto the battlefield when you play a land, because as I've said before, and as I'll say again, these ally triggers are not irrelevant, and the rally triggers are quite good. So having that option is good. And if you find out you don't need the 1/1 and you're just attacking, getting the +1/+1 for your entire team is pretty good as well. I am skeptical again because taking turn 4 off seems pretty weak if you're just playing this. I would rather add to the board in a more significant way, but following it up with either of these abilities seems justifiable. And now we're getting to the rares. Our first one being an ally with Rally, Hero of Goma Fateh, a 5 mana 4/3, which is not really what you want for 5 mana, but would be decent if it had no ability, if not just filler. So Rally, when it enters the battlefield or another ally enters the battlefield under your control, all of your creatures gain indestructible. And I'll repeat, even though this triggers, Rally triggers when an ally enters, all of your creatures get indestructible whether they're allies or not. This seems great. I would definitely first pick this. I would definitely look to draft allies. Indestructible attackers are insane. That just means every turn you play an ally, you get to jam in damage, and your opponent is either losing creatures or chump blocking or just taking a bunch of damage. You should be able to win the game very quickly if you have this card out and it doesn't die right away. It is a little vulnerable with 3 toughness, but at least it is probably going to survive instant speed. I like it also because we've already looked at cards that only deal damage to attackers and blockers, and this will likely be indestructible already by the time it goes to attack. So those cards will not be able to pick off Hero of Goma Fateh or any of your other attacking creatures. Again, another Rally ally, another one I would first pick as well. We get a 3 mana 3/2s, and I've always been fine with 3 mana 3/2s. This Rally gives all of your creatures a lifelink instead of indestructible. So you get a decent body. When it enters the battlefield, everything gets lifelink. All of your creatures get lifelink. And then anytime you play an ally after that, they all get lifelink again. If you were to just play this one turn, and the turn it entered the battlefield, all of your creatures gain lifelink, and you got a little bit of value off that, and you never triggered Rally again, this card would be awesome. So the fact that you can repeatedly give all of your creatures lifelinks makes it even that much better. I would definitely first pick this, and again, very similarly to our last card, I would probably try to force allies if it was open enough for it. Planar Outburst. Now, 5-mana Wrath is something that we've seen a lot of lately. We've seen Crux of Fate, and we've also seen End Hostilities. That's just kind of the price you pay to destroy all creatures on the field. Now, obviously, they all have a little bit of something different here. The thing being different here is that it destroys all non-land creatures. So any of your man lands or any creatures or anything that you've previously awoken will stay on the battlefield. That goes for your opponent's awoken lands as well. 8 mana here for the awaken seems very, very steep. And I don't know that you'll actually make it to 8 a lot. It does make this a lot better if you top deck it in the late game. But this will probably be played at 5 most of the time. Awaken 4, however, makes this kind of similar to Dune Blast or Tragic Arrogance in that you get to wipe the field of anything problematic while putting yourself in favor after the board wipe. Again, though, I imagine this will be mostly just 5 mana, remove all creatures from the field, and that by itself is fine. This is the type of card you want to see in pack 1 so that you can draft white and you can draft around it, but it's not the type of card you want to see late in the draft because if you're not white, you know that you're passing it and you know that somebody at the table has it. You do need to be aware of any format that has a 5 mana, 4 mana, whatever, any sort of format that has the board sweeper. If your opponent's in those colors, you don't always want to play around it, but you should be wary of the fact that they might have it. Then we get this thing, kind of an odd reprint, but sure. We got a 6 mana 4/6 Vigilance Lifelink, which is pretty good by itself. And then this, at the beginning of your upkeep, you have 40 more life, you win the game. So I don't know how relevant this was last time around. I don't know if people actually made this work. I'm sure tons of people tried to make it work, and I'm sure it'll happen again. But I imagine a lot of games aren't actually going to end with 40 or more life, and this guy winning the game for them. It is worth noting the card is just solid by itself, even without that ability. And the fact that it has lifelink and vigilance means that if it's attacking and blocking, you're potentially getting an 8 mana or 8 life point swing every round, every turn, and your opponent's turn. So the damage can add up, and you can easily get to over 40 life, but it means your opponent's not doing very much. So again, if I open this, would I first pick it? Probably. Would I look to pick every single life game card after that? Probably not, just the good ones that already play well by themselves. And I believe this is our final rare, Ameria Shepherd. This is one I'm not as excited about. It's 7 mana, which is huge. And by huge, I mean a lot for a 4/4 flyer, which is quite a bit. That is a very steep cost. Our 7 drops have to be amazing for them to make the deck. Now, landfall is whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you choose a non-land permanent in your graveyard and put it to your hand. You target a non-land permanent and put it into your hand. If you triggered landfall with a plains, you get to put that permanent on the battlefield instead. Now, this is a very, very powerful effect. I think everyone can agree on that. Even if you're just returning cards to your hand every time you play a land, that is very powerful. But the fact that this costs 7 and then requires you to be playing additional lands after that makes me very skeptical on how good the card is going to be. Also, the body is mediocre for 7 mana. It dies to a lot of things, and it's not pushed so far as to be absolutely insane. I imagine there are a lot of games where you can't play this because you can't get to 7, and then when you finally draw that 7th land, you get to play it, and now you have to wait on more land to actually start putting its effect into play. Also worth noting, as I've said before, white does not have any Eldrazi. White does not have any devoid creatures, and white does not have anything that tacks an extra Eldrazi Scion onto it. So if you need to ramp this out, which you definitely can, it needs to be in another color as well, which is kind of awkward because this triggers best if you're playing plains, even though you still get value off of it if you're playing lands. So it pairs with other colors better than in just mono white because you can ramp it out, but you need to be using plains to get the maximum effect here. I imagine there are some scenarios where I pass this card, but I think I would probably still first pick it. I think it's strong enough and the upside is there that I would definitely first pick it. Over a better card in the pack, I don't know. There are some uncommons I would take over Amarius Shepherd. Alright, 2 left. Quarantine Field is our first mythic here. It is an enchantment, enters the battlefield with X isolation counters. The cost is double white and double X. So if you pay 4, it enters with 1 counter. If you pay 6, enters with 2, 8 gives you 3, so on and so forth. Basically, after 2, every 2 additional mana you spend on it is going to give it 1 counter. Now when it enters the battlefield, you exile a non-land permanent an opponent controls for each counter on it. Now, I don't know isolation counters, just a unique counter to keep track. I think this card is being very underestimated as far as limited is concerned. Now, I understand it may not feel like a mythic, but the effect is very powerful. If nothing else, in limited, 4 mana to remove your opponent's biggest threat, whether it's a creature or an enchantment, is very, very powerful. Very similar to Stasis Snare, but with the added ability for 1 extra mana to be able to get rid of something that's a non-creature, like an artifact or enchantment. At 6 mana, you get rid of 2 of your opponent's best things, and that, I think, is the sweet spot where it definitely starts to get value. If you manage to hold this up for 8 or even higher, then the card just becomes insane. But I think at 4 mana, it's good. At 6 mana, it's great. And anything above that, it's awesome. And I think the reason this card is being undervalued is because they don't see it as 4 mana removal. They see it as super expensive, uncastable, or they're comparing it to some sort of constructed format. In constructed, I have no idea how this card is going to play, but in limited, I think it's very good. It is mythic, so it's not going to come up often, but I'm definitely picking this card if I see it. And finally, a card anybody is picking if they see it. We get Gideon, Ally of Zendikar, probably the best Gideon I've seen. I don't know. Gideon at Jura fits a different kind of mold than this one. Now, for 4 mana, it comes down and can immediately start plussing or minusing. Starts with 4 loyalty, +1. Until end of turn, Gideon, Ally of Zendikar becomes a 5/5 human soldier ally with indestructible, still planeswalker, prevent all damage dealt to him this turn. So he becomes an ally. It's worth noting that doesn't actually trigger rally because he didn't enter the battlefield as an ally, but he becomes an ally and he gets all the benefits that your allies get when they trigger rally. This is huge, and he pluses to start attacking. So he can plus, leave himself vulnerable, and likely take a hit, and then just keep bashing for 5 damage. 5 indestructible damage, and he doesn't take damage on the swing back. Or I'm sorry, he doesn't take damage from blocks. That's very good by itself already. Now I think the 0 will come up even more often than the 1. 0, put a 2/2 White Knight ally onto the battlefield. Now this does trigger rally. It puts allies onto the battlefield and triggers rally for all of your other creatures or any tokens you've already made. Now, people compare this to Xenagos, and sure, Xenagos made a hasty 2/2, but the Satyr synergy was not there. Ally synergy is definitely a thing, and the 0 ability, putting creatures out to either protect Gideon or just trigger your other creatures' rally abilities, is already insane enough. And then we get a -4 that I don't think is going to come up nearly as often as these other 2, but is still here. -4, you get an emblem with creatures you control get +1/+1. So basically you get Glorious Anthem for 4 mana if you need it. It is an emblem, so it's a permanent buff for that entire game, and that by itself is pretty good. There are some games where 4 mana to give a permanent +1/+1 buff to anything you play is pretty good. Sorry for the zooming. Now, the dream here is play Gideon, plus on the following turn, minus, and then start making 0/0s for eternity, or probably +0, -4, and then just make all the 0 or 2/2s, which will then be 3/3s. Gideon does everything you want a planeswalker to do. It can protect itself, it makes synergistic creatures, it pumps creatures, and it itself can become a tool. I don't think the comparison to Gideon Jura is necessary because Gideon Jura is a control card, whereas this is a more aggressive card. But this card is insane, and in Limited, it is the definition of a bomb. If your opponent has it, you're likely dead. If you have it, you should be winning that match. Only in clutch situations will you lose if you have the Gideon. Now, that's all of the white cards in the set, all of the mono white cards, and it looks pretty sweet. White has a lot of good removal. It has some playable Awaken cards, because God knows there are some unplayable Awaken cards. And it has a very aggressive curve as well as good allies. I think white is going to be one of, if not the best color in this set, which is funny coming out of Magic Origins where white was insane. But after looking at these cards, I'm very excited. I hope you guys are excited too. Let me know in the comments below about any cards that you agree or disagree on. And I wish you all luck at the pre-releases. I will be back for the next color shortly. So tune in for those videos. Subscribe, like, comment, so on and so forth. But definitely let me know.